right, let's dive into this whole keto thing, especially how it supposedly helps people lose fat. We've got this excerpt here. It's called Keto and Fat Loss, What You Need to Know. So basically, we want to figure out how this diet actually works. What can people realistically expect if they give it a shot? You know, the real deal.
And the real deal is, it really kind of turns the whole idea of fat on its head. So this excerpt, it highlights how with keto, you actually use fat as your main fuel source. We're talking a serious amount here, like 75 to 80% of your daily calories coming from fat.
Whoa, okay, that's got to be way more fat than what we're usually told is healthy, right? Like, am I picturing mountains of bacon here, or what are we talking about?
Well, not exactly mountains of the bacon. It's really about making smart choices with the fats you're eating. Think avocados, cheese, nuts, olive oil, fatty fish. There's a lot of variety, actually. And yeah, our excerpt is totally right when it says there's a whole world of keto-friendly fats out there just waiting to be discovered.
So variety is key. And maybe a little extra research wouldn't hurt either. But with all this fat we're eating, how do we actually lose weight? That just seems so counterintuitive to what we've always been told.
You're right, it does seem counterintuitive, but it all comes back to what your body is actually using for energy. You see, the excerpt actually points out something interesting. It talks about the obesity epidemic here in the US and how it kind of suggests that maybe, just maybe, that old low-fat advice wasn't really hitting the mark. So keto sort of challenges that by training your body to burn fat as fuel instead of relying on glucose from carbs.
Oh, okay. So is that where this ketosis thing comes into play? Is that what we're going for here?
Exactly. Ketosis is that metabolic state where your body basically becomes this fat-burning machine. Now, it's not instant. The excerpt mentions it takes like 4 to 7 days for your body to adapt to burning fat for fuel, which I think is an important thing to highlight because it shows that real change takes time.
Gotcha. So patience is key. No overnight miracles here. But once you do hit ketosis, what happens then? Does that mean you can basically just eat all the fat you want and still lose weight?
That's where things get really interesting. And it's also where a lot of people get confused. Because even when you're in ketosis, you can't escape the laws of thermodynamics. You still need to be in a calorie deficit to lose weight.
Right. Can't forget the fundamentals.
Yeah.
And speaking of fundamentals, you mentioned earlier that carbs are seriously restricted on this diet. Like, what kind of numbers are we actually talking about here?
Yeah, so typically on keto, you're limiting yourself to like 20 to 50 grams of carbs per day. Protein's going to be moderate, around 20 to 25% of your daily calories. And then the real focus is on those healthy fats.
Wow. Okay, that's a pretty drastic change for most people. I can already imagine people struggling with cravings and feeling limited in what they can eat.
I think you're bringing up a really important point there, the whole idea of sustainability. You know, this excerpt really hones in on the science behind keto. But how to actually make it work in your everyday life over the long term, that's a whole other deep dive.
And that's what I think a lot of people really want to know. Like, what does it actually feel like to be on keto? How does it affect your energy, your mood, just your overall sense of well-being? This source mentions it takes a few days to reach ketosis, but it doesn't really get into what those first few days actually feel like.
Yeah, that's true. The subjective experience of keto is kind of a whole other layer to this. And to be honest, it's often what makes or breaks a diet for people.
Totally. It's not just about the numbers on the scale. It's about how you actually feel throughout the whole process.
You got it.
Okay, so we've covered the science behind keto. But let's get real for a sec. How does this actually affect your day-to-day life? This excerpt doesn't really get into that. So what have you found in your research?
Well, one of the most common things people talk about is their energy levels changing. Like once they're adapted to keto, a lot of people say they feel way more stable energy throughout the day, you know, without those usual sugar crashes.
Right. That makes sense. I mean, when my blood sugar dips, I'm basically useless. So it's like trading in those crazy energy swings for a more consistent source.
Exactly. And this whole shift to using fat as fuel, well, it might have some other interesting side effects too. Some people who are really into keto, they claim that it actually helps them think more clearly and focus better. They say it's because of the ketones, you know, that fuel source your body produces from fat.
Interesting. So instead of reaching for a sugary snack for a quick boost, your brain is running on a totally different kind of fuel. I like the sound of that. But is there any real science to back this up?
That's where things get a little bit tricky. The research on keto and how it affects your brain is still pretty new. Some studies have shown some promising results, but others haven't found much of an impact at all. It seems like everyone responds a bit differently.
Right, that makes sense. I guess it's like anything else with health and wellness. There's no magic solution that works the same for every single person. Okay, but there's one thing that keeps popping into my head. Cholesterol. We're talking about a diet that's super high in fat, and we've always been told that's bad for our hearts. So how does that all play out with keto?
That's a really good question, and it's definitely one we can't just ignore. The important thing to remember is that not all cholesterol is bad. With keto, it tends to raise your HDL cholesterol. That's the good kind that actually helps clean out your arteries. But it can also potentially increase your LDL cholesterol, which is the bad kind.
Hmm. So it's kind of a balancing act. It seems like keeping an eye on your cholesterol levels would be pretty crucial, especially for anyone who already have heart issues.
Oh, absolutely. Anyone who's even thinking about trying keto, they should definitely talk to their doctor first, get those cholesterol levels checked, and have an open conversation about the potential risks and benefits.
Right. It really reinforces how personalized this whole thing needs to be. It's not just about blindly following some rules. It's about figuring out how your body responds. And I guess that's why there's so many different variations of keto out there.
You got it. Some versions focus on certain types of fats. Others might emphasize specific macro ratios. It's really about finding what works best for you, for your lifestyle and your goals. This excerpt gives us a solid foundation to start with, but there's a ton more information out there about keto, just waiting to be explored.
That reminds me of something a friend of mine was telling me. They tried keto a while back. Were super strict of it for a while and actually saw some pretty good results.
Yeah.
But then they hit a wall. Said it felt way too restrictive, like they were on a constant diet, which made it really hard to stick with it long term.
That brings up a really important point, sustainability. You can lose weight on pretty much any diet if you're strict enough with it, but the real challenge is finding something you can actually incorporate into your life over the long haul without feeling deprived or constantly battling cravings.
It's not just about finding what works. It's about finding what lasts. Which makes me wonder, are there any downsides or risks people should be aware of? Aside from the whole sustainability thing, the excerpt didn't really touch on that too much.
Yeah, it focuses mainly on the positive aspects. But just like with any dietary change, there are definitely some adjustments that can happen. One thing a lot of people experience in the beginning is something called the keto flu.
Keto flu. Okay, now I'm really curious. And maybe a little scared? What exactly does that mean?
Well, it's basically a bunch of symptoms that some people get when they first transition to ketosis. Things like headaches, feeling tired, nausea, even constipation.
That doesn't sound fun at all. Why does that happen? Is it like your body going through carb withdrawal or something?
That's actually a pretty good analogy. It's probably a combination of things, like your body trying to figure out how to use fat for fuel and potential electrolyte imbalances.
Electrolyte imbalances. That sounds a bit complicated.
So basically, electrolytes are these minerals like sodium, potassium, and magnesium, and they're super important for all sorts of bodily functions, like staying hydrated and how your muscles work when you make a big change to your diet. Especially when you cut out certain foods like carbs, it can mess with the balance of these electrolytes in your body.
Ah, okay. So it's not just about calories and macros. It's about making sure your body is getting all the right nutrients and the right balance.
Exactly. And while the keto flu definitely isn't fun, it usually doesn't last very long. There are things you can do to minimize those symptoms, though, like making sure you're drinking enough water, getting enough electrolytes, and listening to your body.
Gotcha. So it seems like even though this excerpt gives us a good starting point for understanding the science behind keto, there's a whole other side of practical considerations that are just as important.
I totally agree. That's where things get really interesting. The science is cool and all, but how you actually apply it to your own life, your own body, your own goals, that's where the real magic happens.
I like that. So we've talked about the what of keto, but now we need to explore the how.
Exactly. And that how is going to look different for everyone. There's no one-size-fits-all approach here.
So if you had to pick one thing, what's the most important thing for someone to keep in mind as they explore keto further? What's the biggest takeaway here?
I think it comes down to this. Knowledge is power. The more you understand about how keto works, the better equipped you are to decide if it's right for you. And if it is, how to do it in a way that's good for your overall health and well-being.
That's a great point. It's not about blindly following a trend. It's about taking control of your own health journey and making informed choices that feel right for you.
Absolutely. And remember, this deep dive is just the beginning. It sparked a conversation, but now it's up to each individual to keep exploring on their own.
Exactly. And speaking of exploring, I think we've really only scratched the surface here. There's so much more to learn about the practical side of keto, the long-term effects, maybe even benefits beyond weight loss.
Yeah, we could literally talk about this for hours, but for now. I think it's time to wrap up with a final thought-provoking question for our listeners.
All right, so after all this talk about keto, what's the one question our listeners should be asking themselves as they, keep learning about it?
That's a good one.
Yeah.
I'd say it comes down to this. How might your current beliefs about fat and losing weight actually be holding you back? We've been told for so long that fat is the enemy, but this excerpt really challenges that. It asks us to reconsider what we think we know, and to think about the possibility that maybe, just maybe, fat can actually be a powerful tool when we approach it the right way.
Yeah, that's a really interesting way to put it. It's so easy to get stuck in our old ways of thinking, even when there's evidence that suggests,
Yeah.
maybe there's a better way. This whole deep dive has definitely made me question some of my own assumptions about diet and weight loss.
And that's exactly what we want. The goal isn't to tell anyone what to think, it's to encourage you to think critically and to explore different perspectives. The keto diet might not be the right fit for everyone, but I think the principles behind it, like challenging what we think we know, understanding how our bodies work, and really focusing on long-term sustainability, those are all valuable lessons, no matter what kind of diet you choose.
I totally agree. It's about owning your own health journey and making informed choices that feel right for you.
Exactly.
All right, so for everyone listening out there, what final thoughts do you want to leave them with?
Stay curious, keep an open mind, and never stop learning. This whole health journey, it's a lifelong adventure. There's always something new to discover.
Love it. Well, that brings us to the end of our deep dive into the keto diet and fat loss. Hope you found it as insightful and thought-provoking as we did.
It's been a pleasure diving in with you.
And to all our listeners, thanks for joining us on this journey of discovery. Keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep seeking out information that empowers you to make the best choices for your health and well-being. Until next time, happy learning.